Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
Get 15% off a set of BrakeBest Select, Select Pro, or Import Direct brake pads and 2 rotors now at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, gardeners and homesteaders. Welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast. I am your host, Young Ben, and I am here with Batavia the Botanical. She is here with us today.
Batavia the Brave.
The Brave? Is that what you said?
Yeah, a new edition. Mm-hmm.
Batavia the Brave Botanical. How's that?
I'll take it.
You know, fall diseases are a real issue, and it's something that can creep up on you. Do you get a lot of fall diseases, or not a lot, but do you have to deal with fall diseases in your garden?
Occasionally. It depends on how tidy I've kept things. You know, coming into the fall season, it has really dictated, what disease looks like for me.
Yeah, I don't usually get it early in the fall, but it's later in the fall into the winter when I start to get it. So I imagine, I'm in coastal North Carolina. So if you take somewhere a little bit colder, then that could very well fall into that mid-fall range where you start seeing disease. And it can be tough. It can be very, heartbreaking, I guess is the word I'm looking for to deal with. I don't deal with a lot of different diseases, though. Just basically one or two in specific. Why are you looking at me like that? What's the deal?
Oh no, I'm tracking with you.
I feel like I'm supposed to be getting a subliminal message here, everybody, and it's making me uncomfortable.
Oh man, I'm with you.
Before we get started, though, if you'd like, please join us on Patreon, be an Apple subscriber. Check out our seed shop below. Bookmark it because we are getting seeds in soon to put up there for next season. So check that out and be ready. And if you need anything for fall, go ahead and get some. It helps the show. Keeps us going on the air. But look, we got to get down to brass tacks here. If you think you have a disease, what are some stuff that you should be looking for in your garden? Or what are you looking for in your garden is what I like to say.
I think discoloration on leaves. Other signs are kind of deformity of leaves, or branches, right? Stunted plants.
Yeah, stunting is a good one. And wilting, obviously wilting.
Yeah, especially with the weather cooling off, you wouldn't expect, for many of us, much wilting from heat, right?
Exactly.
I will put an asterisk with the discoloration. Let's just make sure it's not, if you're looking at some summer plants, it could just be the cold that's, turn them purple. That's pretty common, peppers. It happens all the time. But when you're looking at your fall plantings, your cool weather crops, if you're getting some discoloration, you may have some issue with disease, some fungus or something.
Yeah. And I think, and the way I'm looking at this, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but if you're listening to this right now, worried about a disease in your garden for a summer plant that's there, you're going to have a rough go because basically at the time this is releasing should be around the 25th or something of September, most summer plants are going to be, if not done, really close to being done. They're probably starting to lose their leaves. They may even be dropping fruits because it's starting to cool off so much. So, this is really geared towards like your brassicas and stuff like that. And we'll get into like specific plants, but like, I know in my experience trying to stretch a summer plant into the cool season, it's just riddled with issues and very confusing issues at that. I think that's the problem I have I have a hard time identifying what's a disease and what is just temperature and amount of sunlight, really important amount of sunlight that's getting to it. And, so we're really focusing on like the cool season crops. You think that's safe to say, or? Well,
when we're talking about gardening in the fall, primarily, we're talking about cool season crops. Kind of that's our mantra. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I still have and probably will as of this episode, I'll probably have the last of my tomatoes pulled, but I still have a couple of cucumber plants that are producing. And now we're at the place where I'm probably being generous when I say by the time this airs, they'll still be in my garden. As I look at, things could change in literally days, let alone, weeks or whatever. And we'll get to one of the particular diseases, which you all guess when I say it, that impacts cucumbers, and it could impact other things, right? So some diseases from summer plants can jump to your fall and cool weather plants, even if they're, they're clearly different plant families. So that's the piece that I'm concerned with, if you will.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's important to note too that, we have two separate styles of gardening. You and I do. I mean, for instance, I have one plant left from summer in my garden, and my garden's fully planted at this point. Newsflash. I totally planted it out. Every bed except for one is planted, and it's all cool season crops where, and that a lot of that has to do with my climate, because I have the season that I have. I can stretch it out in a different manner. When I was gardening up in New England, I would do the same thing. And part of that was because I was a young gardener. But the other part of it, too, is the way that the winter came on. A lot of times it just wasn't really, I didn't understand it, but it wasn't really worth it for me to like pull everything out because I wasn't getting the maximum production. So that's why like a lot of times you'll hear us say two different things, because we do it two different ways. And that's the interesting and difficult part about gardening is each place can have, each gardener has a different way they want to do it and that they need to do it. So it's really a difficult dynamic to deal with in fall.
It's interesting coming into fall. Basically, you have a longer growing season for fall than I do, active growing. We're not necessarily talking about, plants kind of sitting dormant like they do in my garden as we get into fall. And I was just sitting here thinking, and I'm going to wait until we get to the end of the growing year before I make my declaration. But I'm thinking about how your plants for summer, am I wrong in saying that some of them, maybe even most of them, are pulled because of sickness?
No, it's not. It's not necessarily disease. What it is it's a combination of things. So one, if I went through the list, which I'll oblige and do very quickly, like the tomatoes, I had plant determinants. They just kind of outgrow themselves. The peppers, it can be hit or miss. It can be they do great and they'll make it all the way through, or like this year we pulled them because I had this Seminole pumpkin just take over the bed. So I just decided to pull it, and then the heat is the other combination. So yeah, a little bit of disease, but mostly it's heat. We're battling some different diseases for summer that we're trying to figure out, but as a whole, it's usually the heat that gets it.
Yeah, I thought that the heat made the plant sick. But so the theme that I'm going with is still true, whereas the time in the summer for me, if we go to, July, August especially, I still have a pretty healthy looking garden in most cases.
Yeah, you do.
And the declaration I'm not quite ready to make, though, is for a fall garden to thrive in my space, I'm thinking I need to be planting like right at the start of August for fall. So where that leads me, now there's a benefit here. There's a sadness because some of my summer plants are just taking off, but we're not going to dig into kind of how much earlier I can plant and maybe get that production sooner. We're not going to dig into that because that's not what this episode is about. But the benefit could be that if I were to potentially pull some plants earlier, those plants would likely be healthy, which means I'm not battling that summer disease that could spread to my fall plantings, right?
Yeah.
So something to consider as I go into kind of next year's growing. But didn't do that this year, so I do have some things that are limping along here and I'm coming on to fall. And the reason why we have to be on top of it with a number of things, including disease, is going back to that shorter season. Preaching to the choir, I know for some of y'all, you don't get a whole lot of do-overs coming into fall, right? So you need to stay on top of all of the things, including if you see early signs of disease.
Right. And I'm not like, my climate's not like Florida or Texas or anything like that, but I can get my tomatoes and stuff in the ground so early that, by the time you're planting, I'm setting green tomatoes. You know what I mean? Like I'm always basically 2 steps ahead of your garden from my climate. So if you think about it, if you think about it, that's really one explanation for that. Now, when I was in New England, I had the same issue as you, and I didn't really understand. I was very new to gardening on my own, and I didn't really understand the intricacies of it. But getting it into the ground at the right time meant, because of the way the cool weather set in, it would have to be early August, and I just didn't understand how that could work and still get it. And really the answer is a bigger garden in that case, where you can have different spaces set up for that stuff. And I just didn't have the space. And I had a very southern mindset in my garden because that's, where I grew up. So I didn't really understand cabbages and kales and stuff like that. But now I do. And so it's like a whole different ball game. And as I've sat back this year, I've really watched it, and it's, it replays in my head the conversation we had about YouTube a couple years ago about the small plants in fall. And it was like last week I had almost nothing in my garden, and now I have a full garden planted, and it was just overnight it changed. You know what I mean? It was like there's a new breath of life into the garden. But as I get into it and I start looking at these plants, and I'm thinking to myself, I can see and I can remember the different diseases and stuff that I've had to deal with over the years. And I start thinking about how am I going to prevent this in the future and stop it from occurring. And I've had some pretty, I will tell you that Google, just like if you hurt your arm, you're like, my arm hurts. What's wrong? They're like, you got arm cancer and you're going to have to get it amputated in 4 different places that'll spread. And really, you just got a cramp in your arm. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with the garden. It's like, I've got this disease and it's going to last forever. And you're like, oh no, but that's not necessarily the case because you understand your area and how things grow and how the climate is. And you can kind of figure out the pieces and parts to put it together to make a difference and really improve that in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so we lost a little bit of internet connection, and we're back. We're back, we hope. But what plants are most affected by this? We've kind of been going over this a little bit. Basically everything in the fall garden, that's cool season. So what are you seeing when you get a disease? What are you seeing it mostly in? I bet we're going to see similarities.
I think for some of my leafy greens, I haven't had it in the last couple of years, but one year I had a powdery mildew on my collards, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. I wrote into my extension service like, what is this madness. It's I ended up cutting it away, I think, if I remember correctly. This is probably like 4 or 5 years ago even. And that's the reason why I was hinting at, and I don't think I had any type of squash or cucumber plants near it. It's one of those things, right?
Yeah.
And it happened as we got to probably October or something. Now, these were, to be fair, for whatever it's worth, these were collards that had been planted for most of the season. So they had been in my garden, like going back to summer, coming into fall. But they were in a bed solo and by themselves. And so that's pretty hard to manage because, again, think about how cool the weather is in the fall. Most times it's tied to, the humidity and poor air circulation. You find that it spreads. But how cool it is, how damp things stay. That was a problem for that year's garden. I can't quite remember how close I was to harvesting the last of my collards when it started up. But yeah.
Yeah, and it'll jump from, it'll stay in the soil. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's a big issue there. Anything else? Like, again, and I know you're pushing me not to go back to spring or summer. I've seen rust on like sweet potato plants, again, summer planted, clearly coming into fall. I don't have a ton of there's a problem with this particular plant in the fall. And primarily it's because my fall garden has been kind of slim pickings over the years. To be fair, my lettuces and things almost always do well when I get them planted. Spinach has done well. I've had some damaged roots when I've pulled up some, things like late planted carrots or radishes and things. I don't know that I can name the disease, and I do think that there is something to be said about the soil that you're replanting in once we get to this, far in the season. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Well, first of all, in identifying the disease, when you have a pest, you really need to identify it. But my thought process on a disease is if you can't see a pest or pest damage or something like that. And I mean, look, if you've ever tried to look up like what is this disease on a plant and you start reading about it, if you got a book and you read about it, it's almost like you're almost presented with like, here's your 3 options. Mm-hmm. And then it's like an eeny, meeny, miny, mo situation. You know what I mean? It's like, well, we'll just close our eyes and pick the best one and treat for it. And I don't really like treating for diseases. I think prevention is the best method. And I think right off the bat, that'll help. But for me, it's been a little bit on cabbage. I've definitely had some on maybe broccoli. My mind might be fudging a little bit, but believe it or not, kohlrabi, mm-hmm. I've had diseases on, and my Brussels sprouts I've had diseases on and stuff like that, and diseases and fungus, kind of the same category for me, and possibly rutabaga I've had some issues with, but and I think you're going to start seeing a common thread here. It's all about the moisture for me. I've figured that out. Like that's what causes it. And the problem is it just spreads like wildfire. So, but that being said, anything in your garden can get a disease at any point. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but I don't think there's a such thing as a disease resistant plant in general. I know they're labeled that way, but I've had plants that were disease resistant get the disease they were resistant for in the past.
I think that the theory is that you're supposed, it's been cooked up in the lab in a positive way to be more resistant to, not completely resistant to. I do want to mention wire stem disease only because I've not planted. I've seen it in my cabbage and I've seen it in, I think my kale. But I've not planted those in the fall, but it doesn't mean you can't get those in the fall. I've gotten it with my spring planted, cabbage and kale. And the plant just doesn't thrive, right? So it's what you can't. It's the stem basically that looks kind of knobby, and it's not growing. It's not putting on roots, and all you can see on the top is like a plant that's kind of wilting, that's smaller potentially if you don't have it in your other plants and the other plants. And the only way you could really see it is when you pull back some of that soil. If you Google wire stem disease, that's what you're looking for. And if you find it, the only thing I've been able to do, like, there's no returning because your root system is damaged, right? I just pull those plants and keep moving. But it's soil borne, right? So obviously therein lies some of our problem.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I've had it a couple of times before this year, but I had it this spring as well.
I believe I actually have that in some of my cabbages right now. But they came from when I, seeded them in the house and I put them out. I'm not 100% sure. We're going to find out.
And it is common in the brassica family, which...
It's common in the brassica family, and I was just reading, it's very common in the southern part of the United States in the fall, more so than the spring. So there is that aspect of it too. But the University of Illinois actually talks about it as well. The rhizotonia disease is what they're calling it. So yeah, that's since we're talking about different diseases, my biggest one that I fight is it's actually a fungus, but you can go either way. It's white mold, and it creeps up on me.
Oh, so, I remember this from previous year's gardens. Yeah. And the thing is that I was talking about earlier, like if you Google it. I Googled it and they were like, once you get white mold, it's there for years. You're going to have to dig out the soil and replace it. And I was like, oh, great. And so one thing that I did is I managed it, and we'll get into disease management and stuff like that. And it didn't come back. You know what I mean? It didn't come back within that season or the spring, summer. But then in the next fall, it did come back. But it came back in a different place. And what I came to, one thing I know about diseases and fungus and stuff like that is that they'll definitely live in the ground. But it's because it's caused by dampness, excessive dampness. And we get such dry summers that it kind of kills it off on its own. Now, what I didn't realize is one of the biggest studies about white mold disease that I found came out of Canada, which is a totally different climate, which is moist, and it's not that they get more rain, but they get the snow melt. And as you know, when the snow melts, you get mud season. And then it just that moisture just hangs around for a really long time. Whereas in that time frame, when you would normally have that, we're drying up. We just got rains, and so we're kind of always battling watering in the fall and winter. And in the spring, it's we're on the drier side of things. So it doesn't really live, it's not prolific for season after season. But I was terrified at first. I just knew that I was going to have to pull all my soil out and just start over. And that was not the case at all. Yeah. The one disease that I have been scared straight on as and it's exactly what you described. It's like the warning of once you get it, it will live with you. It's like until death do us part. It will be in your soil for all of your live long days. It's club root. And again, prone to brassicas, and it lives in the soil. I've never had it, but that's what I mean by scared straight. I am so afraid of it, surely based on this idea of, if this is year one and I have it, how many years does it take to get out of my soil? I've been afraid of it since 2019, which is wild when you think about it. I've become the fearful gardener.
So you're just living in fear.
Yeah, man. Yeah. But we'll talk about prevention, and, the reason why I'm not waking up, and crying in my garden every morning. around clubroot.
Yeah, and I mean, the problem is like especially with clubroot. I mean, you'll get the signs of it, the wilting, the yellowing leaves and stuff like that. But the only way to truly identify it is to pull that whole plant up. And so, pardon my French, but you're going to have to get to the point where you got the balls to pull that plant out and say like, well, I'm done with it, whatever. And, I think that's the important part is like understanding when you can, you're comfortable diagnosing a watering issue versus a disease issue. And then you can kind of take the next steps from there. And I mean, I've been first to admit it is hard to have a young plant in the ground and be like, I'm going to pull this thing up. Because that's, and especially in the fall, because you're like, this is it. You know what I mean? So it's tough. It's a tough thing to do.
Especially if you started it by seed, you've, babied this thing until you've got it outside. And it's like, all right, most of us are putting healthy looking seedlings in our gardens. Doesn't mean it's 100% every seedling that goes in, looks wonderful. But you've worked on keeping these plants healthy. You're getting it into the garden. Or on the flip of it, you feel like the garden is the answer. Maybe the seedlings have struggled and now you feel like, all right, we get them into the garden and they are going to do better. And then you look up a number of weeks later and you are now fighting a different monster, in the form of some type of disease. It's truly disheartening. And for, I would say the majority of us, this is our last season of gardening for the year, Yeah.
And I'm looking at this clubroot thing too. And
it's kind of freaky, isn't it?
Well, it is freaky, but I'm reading about the biology of it in here, and it says that it's not seed-borne. So it's not like it comes from the seed, and the way that it enters a new area is by infected transplants. So it's a big reason to start your own seeds, right? Because you're not bringing other stuff in, It's just like when you get a house plant or something, you're supposed to quarantine them, right? How many times do we quarantine them? You know what I mean? Usually we're just like, oh yeah, this looks good, and you throw it on the shelf. And it's the same thing, like, should we be quarantining these? But like, how do you quarantine a transplant before you put it in to make sure that it's not going to have an issue? All these different things. It's very complicated when you look at it. Now, I don't know many people who have had clubroot or that have successfully identified clubroot as an issue in their garden and it's persisted. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I don't know if it's as common as we think it is.
It's funny because another gardener mentioned it to me years ago when I was sharing on YouTube at Be Better Garden, collards or cabbage or something that I was planting. And now that you mention it, I don't know that person mentioned it saying I had it or just mentioned it because they knew about it. And so from that point forward, I kind of did the deep dive. So, I mean, I think that's also the balance of it all. Like the extension service we were looking at just now for that says, avoid planting it if you get it. Avoid planting brassicas in that space for 5 to 7 years. There's some other things around, cleanliness around your tools, and you don't want to transfer dirt from one space to another and all of that. But that's wild to think that 5 to 7 years, So again, of course, I'm going to try to avoid getting this, but I think you're spot on. Sometimes we can get wrapped up into the what if, and a number of us are dealing with like a disease in our garden right now. It's like focus on the thing you got versus it's a balance, because I don't want to be cavalier and like, well, you ain't got it, so don't worry about it, but you kind of have to, right?
Well, I mean, you got to keep an eye out for it. I mean, look, let's be totally clear here. This list and we're just focusing on clubroot right now, includes cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, radish, turnips, rutabaga, mustard greens, collard greens, arugula, bok choy, and canola. I mean, is there anything else? Did we miss anything, everybody, for a fall garden? That's basically like the whole realm. I mean, there's a few that didn't. So, yeah, that's something to definitely. And I don't know if I've ever had clubroot, but I know I've pulled up plants, and I need to start inspecting roots when I pull them up more closely. But I've had root systems that they did not ever get big enough to support the plant. And sometimes I wonder, is that like my feeding practices? Is that my soil makeup? Is that the climate? Like, what happened here? And it could have been clover. I don't know the answer to that. So it's just kind of one of those things that we have to be on the lookout for. So what steps do we use to prevent diseases? We've gone over a couple. We've gone over powdery mildew. We've gone over club root extensively. White mold. Did we talk about anything else? Wire stem, stuff like that. So what do we do to kind of prevent these diseases? And instead of like focusing on like each specific disease, just like general practices in the garden that will make it, that'll work out.
Yeah. And I think, this is prevention of spreading. I mean, I think a tidy garden, you're going to be much better off, if you're keeping debris down, right? So dead or dying plant leaves. I know a lot of people, I won't say a lot, I know some people use, leaves of plants as mulch, like mulching in place. And
that's how I got white mold.
Well, yeah, there you have it. Real life example.
That's exactly how, from my Brussels sprouts, I would chop the leaves and I was just like, I'll let them drop. I got white mold that way. And it's because they're still green and they're already wet themselves.
Yeah. I just don't think that the benefit from kind of using that extra greenery is worth the chance. So you have 50% of us have gotten, some disease using that method. 33% if
That's
you count.
a high percentage in this room.
30% if you count Leonard, right?
Yeah, Leonard don't know nothing about it. But, and I mean, it really, a lot of it comes down to moisture. I don't want to say prevention, moisture control. And, like that year, I was like, I'm just going to chop these leaves and drop them right here. Well, what happened there? That's how my mind works, is like, what's the difference between that, leaves, or straw? Those are like your two main options. And the biggest thing is those leaves cause a dense mat. And it wasn't, look, everybody, it's not like I was out here like chopping up a tree and I had like 4 inches on there. But I would definitely have like, it was solid covered around the plant. And you would come out there and the water would be pulled up on those leaves. And then the sun would come and would, it wouldn't dry out underneath. And so you didn't have, it was like an unnatural water cycle occurring. But with leaves, you've got all those air pockets and you can get air in there and the bugs are getting in there and eating it and it's breaking down faster because it's chopped up. Same with the straw. And then you've got these chopped leaves. I think if I would have mixed them into the soil, it would be a totally different story. But instead, I wanted to use it as a mulch. So you live and learn.
I think you hit it on the head. These were nearly whole leaves. When I talk about the shredded leaves as mulch, I almost always say shredded leaves. I don't necessarily just say leaves. And if I do, listen and hear shredded leaves, even if I just say leaves, right? It's exactly that, the water logs that the whole leaves create. And I'm talking about like tree leaves that come off of trees. And I think about how much larger leaves are from a brassica plant, and so you shred them. It does absolutely create those air pockets. It doesn't create that matted experience. It's just much more breathable, which I don't know that we talk about it a ton, but airflow, we talking about it a lot when we get to the tomato season, the beginning of the tomato season and early pruning. Airflow is huge in the garden.
Huge. And with these crops this season, it's even more important because they're all low growing. They're basically touching the soil. Come on, somebody.
Baby, he saw the look on my face and I was trying to get take the words out of my mouth.
But that's the, and so I had mentioned kohlrabi, right? And so what happened there is it's very typical in the South, especially with like mustard greens and turnips, just to scatter seeds and grow them. And so I think I may have done that with kohlrabi one year. And then as they grew, it was just so dense that there was literally no airflow in there. And so once I identified like, hey, there's an issue, I started pulling out every single plant that I did not think was going to produce. First of all, I went and everything infected was gone. And then I went through, and once I did that, I could clearly see airflow. And then guess what happened? I didn't get the disease back. In this case, it was the white mold again. But what I also did is I cut my watering back. And so in this time of year, it's very important to look at your weather and say, hey, it's rain. Like in the summertime, man, it can rain and you can let your water run and it's not going to hurt it. You know what I mean? But at this time of year, you got to be very cognizant in the fact of like, hey, it's been raining for a couple of days. I need to delay my watering. And you may need to delay your watering by a week. Just turn it off because you're not getting that evaporation. You're not getting those warm, drying winds. I know that you can get cold, drying winds, but if your ground freezes or you get frost, you're adding moisture to it and you don't even realize that you're adding moisture to your soil. And that's the trick. Not to mention, we've got plants that can survive. We all know that they can survive cold weather. We've talked about it enough. Frost and even freezes and stuff like that. But if your soil freezes, it's not going to dry out while it's frozen. So you get a cold day and it stays frozen or 35 degrees or something, that soil will not dry out until, you've got to keep that in mind. And a lot of times my garden is way more moist in the fall than in the winter. And that's why we mulch in this season though, because that moisture helps it break down faster.
Yeah. I mean, and even now you can start when you go out into your garden in the morning, especially if you're like in, northern states, go out in the morning, even if you just touch the soil or touch the mulch, you'll feel the coolness. That's why it's also a bit of a challenge when you're, direct sowing seeds this time of year too. Right.
They'll rot in place.
Exactly. Because you're trying to keep the soil moist. But remember that whole top layer of soil that, it looks dried out doesn't mean what's underneath it is dry. And so even, a good example of prevention is being careful about when you're harvesting and the dampness of those plants when you're harvesting. Right.
Yeah.
So I have the last of my beans to pull. Again, I know I'm going back to summer plants, but think about how much you have to touch a plant when you're harvesting beans. When you're harvesting, anything in the cool weather family, most times you're touching the entire plant to harvest, right? Now, if you're pulling the entire plant, then that's that. You know what I'm saying? But if you're doing a cut and come again method, I think that, that's just something to keep your eye on. If you're going into a bed and harvesting some, but not all of what's in that bed, that's one of those things. It's some of our best practices when it comes to keeping things. It's ironic to say sanitary when you're talking about dirt, but...
Well, let me ask you this. How often do you sanitize your pruners?
It's interesting. For tomatoes, in between every tomato cut. For my fall things, I think I need to adopt a new method. Never.
Yeah, I've never sanitized a pruner ever in my entire life. I've never done it. I have done, like, if I've had something diseased, and sometimes I use my pocket knife a lot. It's kind of stupid, but like I cut it and I'll be like, I don't have anything, and I'll spit on the blade and wipe it off and be like, yeah, it's good. Let's just move on. I've just never really done it. And I know that they say like that's how you spread it, but I don't know. I've just never really done it, and I probably should, but it's one more thing for me to keep up with out in the garden. I need, where's my bottle of alcohol or hydrogen or something, And
I just put,
it's just one of those things.
Just for those that do want to join in that, I just put have a little bitty, like, probably got it from the beauty supply store, dollar store, something like that. Little bitty bottle, spray bottle. I have straight alcohol, like rubbing alcohol in, and I'll spray the pruners, and I'll have a rag, and I'll just, again, wipe them down. I normally do it during the height of the tomato season or very early on, even when I'm pruning tomatoes. So when I'm going from one plant to another, I sanitize in between. But once I get past that point, I don't even know where that bottle of alcohol is now.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing too is like having healthy plants. So keeping them fed, fertilizing. You got to think in this time of year, your gardens have probably gone through 3 seasons. They may be a little depleted. And what we do know and is fact is if a plant is weak, it is more susceptible to fighting off a disease. Which brings me all the way back to when we had mentioned in all the other episodes we've ever mentioned, like disease-resistant plants, there's no such thing. Like they always label it that way. You have to have the right recipe for that resistance to kick in if that's something you're going after. And the overall health of the plant, which covers watering, adequate sun, airflow, feeding, all of those things need to all be kind of in the right space in order for that resistance to kick in. Because I feel like if it's weak, if your immune system's down, you're going to get some other disease or some other sickness. It's very easy for you to do so. There's a very popular disease in which that's what it does. It weakens your immune system, and then you don't die from the initial disease. You die from something that you've caught from it. So it's the same with plants. Yeah,
it's interesting you brought up the, I'm glad you mentioned sun. And we've talked about it, and we'll continue to beat the drum of, how the sun is lower in the sky, your plants, your garden is getting less sun, hard stop, right? And we know that sun is a sterilizer of sorts too,
It's the best sterilizer.
So the less you get of that, I think I pulled a tomato plant today and it was so done. I have just a few more in the garden here or there. And I started to mention this earlier on when we were talking about the cucumbers. And I thought about you because I thought about how much your influence has improved, generally I'm going to say me as a gardener, and I'm going to claim the same for you. But the, tolerance of just get it out of there, right? And what I don't want to do is look back on if I had pulled it, right? And so when I think about going into fall and we talk about this prevention and, do you really want to give this thing a chance? I still err on the side of you don't know unless you try it. But when you talk about sickness, there's no sense in pushing for your garden, of course. There's no sense in pushing that thing forward. Just period. There's no sense in putting sick plants into your garden this time of year. That one time, and luckily it didn't bite me, I
computer stout
clipped the leaves that had powdery mildew. But in hindsight, I probably should have just pulled those. I could have interrupted next growing season in that particular bed, so, and especially when it comes to plants that you've gotten quite a bit off of already, do yourself a favor. So yeah. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm glad that you kind of adopted that because I learned that the hard way. And once I started doing it, things really, it started changing the way that I garden. That one small step led to bigger steps within the garden. And, I even try to do the same this time of year. And look, I'm going to tell y'all, I'll go out there in October and November and I'll have plants growing. And that's when I'll start to see things being I don't know if it's going to make it. And it's really hard to just kind of pull the plug. You know what I mean? It's because that's my last chance. If I plant a whole bed of cabbage and I pull half of them out, I've lost half of my harvest already. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But at the same time, what we have to think about is not only are we preventing disease and stuff now, but we're also preventing it in the future. And so the one other aspect of this, which we really need to think about is now is the time to start using your crop rotation and within the same year. So if you planted your cabbage in that bed in the spring, and remember that big long list I read you about clubroot. If you're scared of clubroot, none of those plants should go back in that same bed. So we've got to figure out a way to rotate those crops and keep that going constantly, which is the biggest puzzle for the whole garden, in my opinion.
Yeah, tomatoes and brassicas are one of the things I love to grow. And when I adopted crop rotation, ironically, because of club root for my collards and my, brassicas back in 2019. I fought it for everything else. Tomato Gate 2022 is when I finally said, all right, fine for my tomato plants, and I moved them around, right? But the fear of club root is what pushed me to move my collards. And it's one of the biggest pains. Move my cabbage, and so on, because of the space that I have. This is not a big field. And when it gets to the quantity that I want to grow in, for things like tomatoes, I'm teetering on, probably more like every 2 years I'll move them. You know how we backslide, you find a solution, then you're like, well, maybe it'll be fine if but I definitely do try to move around my collard greens and my cabbage and so on. And then I also pay close attention to if those plants were sick, so I'm generally talking about rotating healthy plants, right? But if those plants were sick, it's an especially, important task, I think, to introduce into your garden. Now, the only other side is, and you and I generally both do quite a bit of monocropping in our individual garden beds. A garden bed probably has most of the same plant in it. But a way I believe that you can manage against that is, when you're planting a diverse garden bed. I've just not really been able to successfully pull that off in recent years. Mixing up those crops in a particular bed. I think that that's a helpful approach as well. In the fall, it's harder because we're planting a lot of the same things, right? They belong to the same family, so.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of them are in the same family. Well, nightshades are a big swath of the summer garden, too. I don't think people realize that there's so many different species in the same family, but yeah, it's tough. And I mean, one thing I'll say, for disease prevention for next year, before we move on to the next part, is if you plant mustard where tomatoes were, it's known to keep the spicier the mustard. And if you are done, when you're done with it, you chop the leaves and the roots up and you put it back in the ground. It'll actually help with like nematodes and stuff like that, root knot nematodes, which are very prevalent. So that's one thing you can plant this way, even if you're not going to eat them, and put them in. But again, watch the spacing, because it's tempting just to like cast out seeds and let them grow, but then you're just setting up a recipe for disaster in the future. But that's something you can do to start preparing for the next year. And even if you're rotating crops, then it's just even better, even better. And look, if you've never had a spicy mustard green, give it a shot. They're really good.
Yeah, I try to get to them before they get too spicy. And one of my least favorite things to do is thinning. But when you talk about the broadcasting of seeds, because you may be broadcasting them because it's easier, you may be broadcasting them because you have a shorter season left, so you really want to try to hit that germination. But there's also the important note of, to your earlier point, you're going to have a lot of cluster plants if 50, 60, 70% of those germinate, right? So coming back in and thinning, it's a pain, but I think it's definitely necessary.
Absolutely. So if you get a disease, what do you do? So now you've gone out and you've identified, I've got this. What am I going to do? That's the question. So I can tell you, like with the white mold, what I did in particular, and it, like I said, it seemed to work. I took all the appropriate steps. Even the powdery mildew and stuff like that's all moisture related. And so the first thing I did is I cut back the watering immediately. But also what I did, because the white mold was, what it did is it attacked the stem. The bottom leaves would have the mold on it, and then the stem would collapse more than likely. And like for the heads of cabbage, it would just kind of rot right there at the head of cabbage, at the base of the head. So when I'd pull the plant, I'd look, and if there was anything on the ground, or not if there was anything, but I would go ahead and just take a handful of that soil out and get it out of that bed. You're just kind of removing those initial spores. Is it a total removal? Absolutely not. But the way I looked at it is I was removing the numbers of the spores in that area. And so I would get that out of there and remove it. And that was, that came from like, oh, you've got to remove all your soil, which I was like, well, absolutely not, because the whole bed's not covered. So I started doing that, and that seemed to really help keep it down.
Yeah, I did the same thing when I had wire stem, pull the plant, and then scooped up the soil around it. I think small things like what was it? Powdery mildew maybe. And I wore like disposable gloves, and I was careful to, when I discarded the plant, I use buckets for everything. I'll put garden waste in buckets and then dump it into a real bag, and I didn't do that because I didn't want those spores to come in contact with the plastic bucket, and then I'd be carrying dirt in that plastic bucket in 2 weeks, so being careful around those practices when you decide that you're going to make the move, pull it. I think also depending on what the disease is, like if it's something that is more airborne, in general, what do you do when looking around the rest of your garden? Look to see if it's time to do some pruning for these plants, right? We talk about a prune when you cut something, it's a wound, and it is, but do you really have good airflow throughout the garden? Because if there's disease in one part of the garden, it doesn't mean it's going to spread into your entire garden, but the rest of your garden is susceptible.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not like it's going to jump up and fly 200 feet to the opposite side of the garden right away.
But the conditions could be the same that created it.
And it could work its way over there eventually. So, and I mean, I don't think I said this to start off with. I need to be very clear. Remove the plant. Remove the plant. Remove the plant. I told you 3 times, so you can't forget it now. You get a disease, remove the plant. Don't make the mistake of leaving it because it will just fester in the soil. But don't plant anything that's susceptible to that in that area for the next year or 2 or, I mean, as much as I hate to say it, 3. Give it some time to work its way out. Don't give it anything that will let it grow. So this is not related to fall, but I had mosaic virus in my green beans last year. And without doing any kind of research, I was just like, I'll put my cucumbers there. And they were looking good. And then they showed the same signs. They were just wilting for no reason. So I had to pull my cucumbers this year. And what I ended up doing is I just removed that trellis altogether. I just completely pulled that trellis out. And I said, you know what? I clearly am dumb enough to where I'm going to keep trying to put something on this trellis. Let me remove this trellis so I don't have this issue, and then we can move on with our lives, and everybody's going to be happy and, whatever. We can just figure something else out. So I had to do that. So
go back to that for me, because the structure, I've followed, I think you mentioned it last year on YouTube under Sandy Bottom Homestead. And I saw you talk about it this year in your videos. So mosaic, and I didn't look it up because it's kind of like, well, that's Ben's disease, in his garden, right? So, is it soil borne?
Well, so the way I got it originally, I'm convinced, based off of my research, was the Japanese beetles are known to carry it. And so as every year they attack that plant, they pass it on to it. And then then we have what we have now. And so then it goes from there into the soil and then goes, because I didn't have Japanese beetles on my cucumbers this year. And like I said, they were looking good. But then they started just one after the other, just wilt.
So is it the trellis
pulling them
now that's also contaminated? Like you said, I heard you say.
I think it's in the soil.
Okay.
I removed the trellis just because I was going to.
You don't want to grow anything that's going to.
Well, I'm going to keep putting them, be like, oh, I'm going to try again this year. And I'm just going to keep making it worse. So I just removed the trellis.
Are you going to place the trellis somewhere else?
Yeah, it's been sitting out in the sun. And, I may end up sanitizing it, maybe. I don't know. Actually, if I sanitize it, I'm gonna take a torch to it and I'm gonna cook it.
Yeah,
you know
like
what I mean?
Iron trellis or something. Yeah, I mean that's actually such good discipline, though. Right, when it comes to, all right, you got to year 2 and it's like, all right, here it is back again with a different vegetable, but they both are susceptible to it. And let me help myself next year. Let me just remove this trellis so I'm not, because you think about some of the things that would climb. It was beans and then cucumbers. Like, you got a trellis. What else are you going to put there? You put melons on there and guess where we are? Right back where we started, most likely.
Yeah. And so what I need to do is I really need to, this winter, look at it and say, like, what does mosaic virus attack? And then just kind of figure out, like, okay, I can't plant this X, Y, and Z there. Because I know not everything is. Now, I could try and go brave and say, well, hey, this is a mosaic virus resistant seed. Let me put that on there. But I feel like you're just kind of tempting fate at that point. You know what I mean? I don't think a disease resistant seed is meant to go in a disease infested area.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's counterintuitive.
But that's exactly to your point of the, it's in the ideal circumstances and planting situations and, and garden growth. These things are probably more resistant than its non-disease resistant version of a seed, Yeah. But it's important to note, too, that diseases will stay in your soil for years to come. So that's why the prevention aspect is, like, so important. And if we take those steps to prevent disease, then you can kind of go from there, and that you're kind of setting up for the future in the right way. You never want to be reactive. You always want to be, on the defense, always. Or is it offense? I don't know. Offense.
Offense. You want to be on the offense. Yeah. So you just always want to be looking out for that problem and not have to just like attack it, because then once you do it, it really is too late. So, thinking about that and moving forward, that's why I moved that trellis out of the way. Now, there does come a point in every podcast where I do have to tell you about the planter app. And the reason why I'm bringing up the planter app now is because in my planter app, I have under the notes section, mosaic virus. So I can look under it and say, like, hey, it's a fail-safe reminder for me. Not to mention, we've talked about the crop rotation aspect of it. But remember, I told you that you have to have a crop rotation in the same year. Well, you don't have to, but you really should. And so each year in my planter app, I have 3 garden plans: spring, summer, and fall. And I can go back and look at the spring plan, see where everything was, and then make the changes accordingly to my fall plan, so that I don't have these things coming, because I don't want to be living in Batavia's worst nightmare. I don't want to have club root. You know what I mean? We read you those super long list of club root things. Now, you can go in the app and look at different plants, and it'll tell you what diseases that they are susceptible to. And that's what I'm going to look at as well. I'll use that as a big resource for me, and I'll cross-check it with other ones, but that's going to be in there as well. So between the drag and drop interface, the square foot gardening style, it's very visual. That visual aspect of it, it helps us plan our gardens into the appropriate manner, so we don't have these disease issues in the future. We don't have these, we can kind of stay on top of it. So there's a link below. Check it out. Get yourself the discount. It's a lifetime membership. If you don't know if you want it, get it and try it, and then come back and get the discount from one of our links. It'll help you in your gardens immensely and keep track of all this stuff. It's available on the Google, Apple, and Play Store. And you can use it on your phone, your PC, which is my favorite way, or your tablet. And then, you're off to the races. So check out the planter app. It's a supporter of the show for a reason, and we love having them as a sponsor because we believe in the product. And since we talked about the planter app, it is now time for the listener question of the day. But today, Batavia gets an option. She can answer a question or hear feedback.
Oh, let's hear feedback.
I knew you'd pick it. I knew you. It's actually not feedback. It's what we were talking. I don't know what it is. I can't classify it. All right. Emily writes.
Hey, Emily.
Did y'all hear that timing, everybody? We're getting there. We are getting there. All right. So we were talking about peas in a previous episode, and Emily has written in some clarification for us. So, hey, Ben and Batavia, there is a big difference between peas, laughing smiley face, and what you shared wasn't quite accurate, at least according to what I've heard from various sources. So let's all combine here and see what we got. Shelling peas are grown to eat the seed pea when young. The pod is discarded. Snow peas are thin and often used in stir fry and eat the entire string thing, pod and all. Same with snap. You eat the entire fruit. Sometimes you can let it go to a point where you grow for the pea itself, not the pod, but it's usually eaten whole. In the UK, they use a French term. Oh boy. I don't know what she put in ménage tout. And that means eat all, which helps to distinguish from something where you throw the pod away. And as far as spring and fall, because the plants are cold hardy, but the fruits aren't, I've heard it's best to grow snap peas and snow in the fall, shelling in the spring since the young into cold weather, and you can eat the entire pod so you can harvest at any stage. Shelling in spring is better because there's no threat to the fruit freezing. That's all I've got. Love your show, Emily.
Thanks, Emily. The way my head is swirling, like I'm convinced. Sometimes, I don't know if you, on a personal note, you got a lot on your mind. Sometimes I will remember a dream later on, like in the day or something, like the dream from last night. And then I'll have this moment of confusion. You don't ever remember your dreams?
No, I was asking you, was your dream about me?
No, never. Okay. Then I'll have a moment of like, wait, did that really happen or was that a dream? So Emily, we were chatting on Instagram about another, like 2 listener questions of the day ago. And so
the same Emily?
Emily from the episode listener question of the day, that was the same Emily. I don't know if this is the same Emily.
Oh, wait, we're in a dream.
No, we're in real life.
Oh, okay, we're in real life.
I'm leading up to it. So the clarification around the peas, like the very beginning and the very end, either I've read this somewhere recently, meaning like someone that listens to the show provided the clarification, or you've read this. So maybe I was dreaming that you read it. I don't know. So now I'm uber confused because I won't rest until I figure out where I heard this explanation before. So yeah.
Oh boy, you better bring some coffee to the next episode then.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. So I obviously snow peas are that's obvious. But the other ones, the shelling peas and the I'm confused, and snap peas. So I don't know, man. I feel like they just need a new name. Whoever came up with the name, you discover the species, you get to name it. I get it. But it makes sense what she said about the growing of them in the spring and fall. That makes sense to me. I like that. It lays it out a little bit. And I think that's an important aspect to this is, just because the plant can survive doesn't mean that the fruit will. And that's really, that's a good lesson to learn, because as we get, especially, it's very timely this time of year. And I've never, ever successfully had peas in the fall. I've tried a couple times. I just haven't really sealed the deal. So
maybe the issue is that I heard part of this from an episode that we did. Dude, I'm actually going to tap out. I don't know where I heard this information from.
Well, we talked about this on the podcast. Yeah, but
she wouldn't be clarifying it if we got it right on the podcast. So the pieces that she the pieces that she read, like I remember hearing someone say this stuff. Like I was sitting here like, didn't you already read this feedback before? Anyway. All right, well, I'm going with what Emily said as of this moment. I'm going to discard anything else in my mind. That's me erasing all of the other stuff about peas in my mind. And
Emily's peas are gospel.
A fail for peas in the fall, just so you know.
So what Emily said about peas is gospel from here on out. For the next year, we're going to test it. We're going to see. I'm going to I'm going to say this out loud. I'm going back to the drawing board. I'm casting away all of my pea seeds and I'm starting over fresh this year. I'm going to try and grow shelling peas in the spring. I'm still going to grow my snow peas in the spring because they do great, but I'm going to grow shelling peas in the spring. And then, snap peas into the fall. So that's what I'm doing next year. Write it down, Leonard. I don't want to forget, Leonard. Do not let me forget, Leonard. Thank you, Leonard. Okay. So thank you, Emily. And if you'd like to be like Emily and send a question or even a gentle, that was very gentle too, that we got something wrong. So thank you for being nice and gentle with us, Emily.
I feel like Emily is a teacher, or maybe Emily has children, or both, or she's just a kind soul, because I've never been corrected so kindly. I think I didn't feel attacked. The only bit of concern is my head is now like, wait, did I already read this from Emily? Which clearly you guys know I'm not going to let it go. I am going to track it down, right? What Emily has shared is gospel. I just need to know if I've read this or heard this 2 times. That's all. That's all I need to know. What if it's 2 different Emilys that have given us the correct information on peas? Wouldn't that be something?
That would be something. That means that people named Emily are very smart. So I was going to say that all teachers are kind, gentle souls, but that is absolutely not true. No. I had a 4th grade teacher that was a bitch. I mean, she was my 2nd grade teacher and I hated her, and she came back to the 4th grade. She singled me out. Gosh, I hated her. Anyways.
So the use of that word, I was hoping that it would have been a guy. Now that would have been evolved.
Oh, yeah. Well, look, this was a long time ago. Give me a break. I'm not as young as I want to be, okay? Doesn't the gray say something? It's a little misleading.
Now you're offending me. Listen, I'm going to... not the appointment coming up, but the appointment after that, I'm getting my hair colored again. So you have to ignore the grays.
You know what? I never had a male teacher until, I don't know, probably high school. That was very uncommon.
I had one
now that I think about it,
teacher in grade school. Like, I think it was like 7th and or 8th grade, and he definitely made an impact. And then I had a bunch of different male and female teachers in high school. So.
Yeah, no, I take that back. The gym teacher when I was in elementary school was a male, but I mean that's kind of, I don't know, that's pretty stereotypical, I think. Anyways, that is absolutely nothing about gardening. I wish I had a gardening teacher when I was in elementary school.
Dude, that'd be so cool.
So a little trinket of information about me. When I was a kid, I wanted to do audio and video and photography for a living. Shocker. And I was in the 4th grade, and they had a contest for the news, and you had to write a skit or something like that. So the video teacher got to us, and we got together, and a couple friends of mine, we wrote a rap. And it was about, recycling had just come out then. Okay, I'm dating myself. But we took it to a new level. And so what we were talking about was pre-cycling, right? And so we wrote this thing, and we won. And so we had a commercial. And this is gardening related to an extent. But the rap was, all right, kids, pre-cycle. It's very easy, and it's not that cheesy. All you have to do is buy things that have been recycled. So pre-cycle, right? So we won. We go and we start filming. The news crew comes. We do it in 3 locations. We did it in a grocery store. I don't know where the other one was. And then the last one was at the teacher's house. So we go to the teacher's house, which, we all had crushes on. She was a young teacher. She was hip. She was into technology and stuff. She had an amazing, I don't remember clearly, but I remember being in like this, like almost like a rainforest in her backyard.
Oh, wow.
It was so cool. It was just, I don't know. If I find the video, I'll send it to you. It's on videotape. I need to get it digitized, but I'll try and send it to you so you can see it. It's pretty cool. Now, my mind may be playing tricks. She probably had like a sprig of grass, and I was like, cool, I'm at her house. But, there's a little bit of information about my past.
I'm not sure what to do with that, but thank you for sharing with the class.
Just sit on it and hold it. That's all. It's ammo.
Wait for it to hatch.
All right, everybody. Now that I should be embarrassed, but I'm not, we're going to close out the show. So come buy some seeds from us. Come be a subscriber. Thank you for listening. Get your fall gardens going. Prevent disease. Keep everything real. We'll be back at you next Thursday with another beautiful show of the Backyard Gardens podcast, because we're always here for one thing, and that's to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders. So go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens community garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show, or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Macy's has all of your Grill Master essentials for Father's Day. Stop by to get our hand-trimmed chicken breast and certified Angus beef patties that are ready to grill, so Dad can have his favorite dinner. Make sure to browse our bakery to find the perfect no-work Father's Day treat with our decadent peanut butter bars or famous donuts. Right now, you can get boneless beef ribeye steaks for $12.99 per pound at Macy's. Shop these Father's Day essentials in-store or online at Macys.com through June 18th. Macy's, happy shopping!
This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? It's hard to make time for the things that keep you healthy, but being consistent with self-care is like working a muscle. And when life gets crazy, that muscle keeps you strong. Therapy is the ultimate self-care, and BetterHelp makes it easy to get started with affordable online sessions you can do from anywhere. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.